Have we got any questions at all for our speakers?
I just wanted to ask a very quick question of Lothar, which is how, what an incredible number of works, large-scale works you've made over the years, and whether you make all the paintings yourself, or how many assistants you work with. They're incredibly finely finished, so I'm sure it's a question on a lot of people's minds, actually.
There are some where I painted it entirely myself. I mean, like the early ones, for instance, I can remember, the one at East International, I think, I didn't have an assistant there, I painted that. I even had all my paint in my suitcase, which they still allowed at the time on a plane. It was quite extraordinary, and it was extremely heavy. Or the early projects I painted myself, which I think is kind of important. It's important to me because I think when you start to practice like that, there are some technical issues. They look, I think you don't see it in the end. In the end, it often looks like as if it's done in 2 or 3 days, or in 1 hour, or because it's just a plain surface. But you need to, whatever, there are some technicalities involved. But then there have been projects later on where I worked, with one. I think the first project where I had quite a number of assistants was the one in the Mappin Art Gallery in Sheffield, which was bigger than what you saw on the slides, where I suddenly worked with 4 or 5 assistants, which I at the beginning found extremely stressful, because when I started suddenly to work with assistants, I had to let go, because you realize I cannot just sit there all the time and just worry what they're doing. And if this is and people work in a different way, and then that was quite a change. In one way that I had to realize from the production, I sometimes have to step back, but it opens the moment when I got projects where in the budget I could have assistants. Then it opens other doors as well, and you can think as well differently, because I think most of these projects, and this is so particularly I think with site-specific wall paintings, is that at a very different element of the practice than when you work in your studio, is that they are always within a time frame. They're always with a deadline, and quite often it's not that long. So it actually informs what you can do, and it influences if you know I have to do it myself, or whatever, I can work with 10 people. So and there have been, one of the projects which was probably the biggest commission, which I didn't show a slide of, in size-wise, was the work I did for the Ministry of Justice, which were 53 wall paintings, which is still there in Great Peter Street. I needed a project manager, who was on site all the time, and I think we worked for 4 weeks with 10 people every day. And there it was clear, when you then employ someone who manages it, it's very difficult to be there as an artist, because it's not working. So then I only decided, I only came always in the evening, or my contact then was only with that guy, and he then became my basically main assistant, and we do lots of projects together. But for instance here, I worked with 2 assistants. One assistant I brought with me, and with one assistant I got here who was from Lincoln, and that's kind of that. Yeah, I hope that.
Thank you.
To add some context to that, the one here, it was a 3-week turnaround from show to show, but between 3 weeks, I think we added up 1,200 man hours. There was 3 carpenters on site for 9 days, and 3 painters on site for 10 days. So a huge amount of work.
And of course, Duncan Grant had some help with the murals as well from the College of Art. So any other questions at all? I was just going to ask a question to Simon, actually. You mentioned Kenneth Clark championing art in churches. Can you say anything about any of the other critical reception, any particular press that championed this?
Well, one of the interesting things, I think, was in September 1944, Bell organised a conference in Cheshire called the Church and the Arts, and people like Virginia Woolf, Henry Moore, T.S. Eliot, even Dorothy L. Sayers, I think, all came to Chichester to in the height of the Second World War to question, what was really happening. And of course, one of the big issues, I think, was there were so many bombed churches following the Second World War. This question about what do you do? Do you rebuild? Do you build new buildings? How do you... And this is, Feibusch coming over almost, I guess not technically destitute because he was supported by the Gestetner family, but he actually did the first of his commissions for free because he partly wanted to express his gratitude for being taken in, but also I think it was a kind of knowing that actually by getting some examples he then got a lot of commissions from the Church of England subsequently. But I think a lot of those artists, like Feibusch, because they were working even in modernist buildings, were working in an idiom that was both modern and looking to the past. It made it acceptable. And even Sutherland, with his very, very modern pictures, of course, is basing it on an image from art history. So that's always the kind of reference point.
Is there anybody else who'd like to ask our speakers any questions at all?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jane Brockes. I'm doing a PhD in post-war stained glass. And I'm very interested to see people's reactions to hear the words they use to react to the Duncan Grant murals, which are talking about sexuality, or they're contradictory, or they're confusing, and yet nobody seems to mention anything about his sexuality and the homoerotic content. And I'm just wondering why. I've read the book as well, it was commissioned, and that doesn't mention any of it. But it's well known that he was gay, and I'm just wondering why we're all skirting around this issue and not using these words.
Who'd like to take that?
Well, there is a publication coming out today where I think I did mention it because for me, when I actually saw, I was not talking about my response to the Duncan Grant murals here, but for me that was clearly one of the most striking things. When I saw the mural the first time, which was in 1999, when I came with a friend. Then, there were two things I really remember. That was the colour, which you mentioned as well, and I found this really, that yellow stuck in my head, and I think it's very special. But then as well, the very obvious homoerotic context, and I was quite fascinated by that. Kind of, because I'm gay, so I responded to that. And yeah, because we did an interview, Simon did an interview for that publication. I think we did talk a little bit about that. Yeah, and I think it's quite. For the as well for the closure and for the controversy. I do not know how much. I cannot say that, but I'm pretty sure that was part of the reason.
But I think what's also very interesting is that Duncan Grant, at the point he did this, was, by the time it was finished, he was 70. And I think there's a real sense of an artist who doesn't really care about whether he's offending anybody or not. And actually, given what he did at Berwick in 10, 15 years earlier, where the crucifixion that he painted on the back wall is possibly the campest crucifixion I've ever seen. It's so extraordinarily erotic. And again, it was I think it was Edward Labar who was the model for that. And so it's not like there isn't a kind of historic context in Grant's own work.
I'm not worried about the historic context. Why nobody's talking about this? Because to me, it's completely other. It doesn't offend. It's very much part of his art. But I'm wondering why if that is the issue, that the chapel was closed for, then it just feels like it's being a little bit dishonest to find other reasons to close it.
I think what's also really interesting is the fact that if they did have concerns about it, I think it's what Linda said, that actually one dean, the next dean is a completely different thing. And again, this is what happened at Chichester, that you had Hussey, and then the dean that followed Hussey kind of felt that he'd got to commission something, and he commissioned something by Patrick Proctor, which is a truly dreadful painting. And Proctor, of course, also a gay artist, does a baptism scene, and was then, and all the figures were nude, and then was told that they had to be draped. and so came in rather kind of obviously completely unhappy about this and did these really awful kind of cursory kind of frocks over everything, these bits of drapery. So it's a completely unsuccessful painting as a result. It was a real problem for them.
And I think it's also as well, when Grant and Paul Rose come here in 1961, you've already got them having to ask to come into the chapel. You've already got lots of mops, and it's already clearly been using as a storage cupboard at that stage. And that's obviously long before Michael Holroyd's book. So I think it's a very sort of quick reaction to it. But of course, Linda will be able to say so much more.
I'm just going to add to that question as well. From an institutional standpoint, there's research from America saying that the voice of the museum is trusted more than the media or politicians. So very much when we talk as curators, it's seen as fact, and nowhere has it ever been recorded why the cathedral closed that. So I'm very aware that I won't discuss that or put those words into a partner institution's mouth, even though they might be in my mind. So institutionally, that's why we've handled it in that way, basically. So I don't feel it's my position to make guesses on somebody else's opinion why they closed the chapel, and then put that into a context where people will believe that because I'm writing on the wall, basically. So that's why I shy away from it, basically. But it is obviously important in the work. So, okay, in terms of lunch, we're going to go up to the cathedral.